Jimmy Page didn't just play guitar, he conjured thunderstorms with it. But even gods of rock have opinions, especially savage ones. Let's count down 6 guitarists Jimmy Page couldn't stand, starting with number 6. 6. Ritchie Blackmore, Deep Purple. Before we dive into this beef, let's remember, Jimmy Page wasn't just a guitarist, he was the blueprint. A sorcerer in bell-bottoms who didn't play the guitar so much as cast spells with it. And that meant anyone else stepping onto his turf with a big ego and louder amp was asking for trouble. Enter Ritchie Blackmore. Now, Ritchie Blackmore wasn't some garage band wannabe. The man helped define the sound of Deep Purple, pushing hard rock into proto-metal territory with riffs like Smoke on the Water. But to Jimmy Page, Ritchie wasn't a peer. He was a provocateur. These two didn't just clash musically, they clashed spiritually. See, Blackmore was brash, competitive, showboating. He once bragged that Page was sloppy and that Zeppelin was overrated. He called Led Zeppelin's success mostly hype. Meanwhile, Page stayed cool but cutting. He rarely named names, but insiders said he viewed Blackmore as a noisy technician, more flash than soul. Their unspoken feud simmered in the press, with both camps taking subtle shots. Blackmore mocked Zeppelin's live shows, saying they were full of mistakes covered up with volume. Page never retaliated outright, but when asked about Deep Purple, his answers were ice cold. Like, they're good at what they do, just not my thing. Translation: Ritchie was loud, fast, and ambitious. But to Jimmy, he lacked magic. Absolutely. Let's keep it going. Chugga 5, Ted Nugent. You might know him today as the guy yelling about politics, grilling venison, and waving crossbows on talk shows. But back in the 70s, Ted Nugent was a force, a wild, shirtless blur of leather and feedback, wielding a Gibson Birdland like it was a weapon. And for a time, his stage show was chaos in the best way. Wall-to-wall energy, monster solos, full volume everything. He had presence, no doubt. But Jimmy Page, he wasn't impressed. Not then, not ever. See, Page respected a certain kind of musical danger, the kind that whispered mystery, not just screamed, "Look at me." And Nugent, he was more explosion than elegance. Sure, Stranglehold had some bite, but Page allegedly called Nugent's playing empty calories. Flashy, sure, but with no soul underneath. One rock journalist put it even more bluntly, quoting Page as saying Nugent was just a carnival barker with a distortion pedal. Yikes. And Ted hated Led Zeppelin. He wasn't shy about it either. In interview after interview, Nugent slammed Zeppelin's sloppy, drugged-out live shows, calling them overrated, and Page a heroin addict with sloppy hands. His exact words, "I could play circles around Jimmy Page in my sleep." That's not a disagreement, that's a declaration of war. But Page never responded directly. He didn't have to. When asked about certain hard rock acts that leaned more on image and volume than craft, he offered a sly smirk and said, "Some people try too hard to convince you they're dangerous. No names, just smoke." The truth, Jimmy didn't see Nugent as a rival. He saw him as a sideshow act, loud, cocky, and ultimately forgettable. Because in Page's world, danger wasn't about how high you jump or how fast you play. It was about what you summon with a note. And to him, Nugent never summoned anything but noise. 4. Yngwie Malmsteen. If guitar playing were a sport, Yngwie Malmsteen would be the Olympic sprinter, blisteringly fast, technically flawless, and not shy about telling you so. Rising in the 80s with his neo-classical shredding, he fused Paganini with power chords, flooding rock with arpeggios and lightning runs that made jaws drop. Fans called him a virtuoso, critics called him excessive. Jimmy Page? He leaned toward the latter. To Page, the guitar wasn't about speed. It was about atmosphere. Every bend, pause, and imperfect slide told a story, holding the crowd's attention with feeling, not just flurries of notes. Malmsteen, in his eyes, turned it into a speed trial, cramming as many notes as possible into every measure. Page once remarked that too much technique can strangle the music, a line many believed was aimed at Yngwie. Malmsteen didn't hold back either, calling Zeppelin's riffs basic and claiming Page couldn't play at my level even on his best day. To him, Page's loose blues-driven style was old man guitar, outdated in a world of disciplined virtuosity. But for Page, all the sweep picking in the world couldn't replace raw soul. One saw the guitar as a battlefield of skill, the other as a canvas of emotion. This wasn't just a difference in style, it was a collision of musical values. Page believed in grit, mystique, and letting notes breathe. Malmsteen believed in total domination of the fretboard. To Jimmy, Yngwie's playing was a hurricane of notes with nowhere to land. To Yngwie, Page was a relic. Two guitarists, two empires, and a canyon-wide gap in philosophy, the kind of gap no amount of distortion could bridge. 3. Prince. Yeah, Jimmy Page didn't want any smoke with Prince. And it wasn't out of fear, it was out of knowing he couldn't keep up. There's no documented beef, no tabloid headlines, but what did exist was this unspoken tension, a kind of reverent avoidance. Page respected the Purple One's genius, but wanted nothing to do with being compared to him. Let's break it down. Prince wasn't just a pop icon, he was a musical shapeshifter. The man could bend genres like spoons. One minute he's doing James Brown-level funk, the next he's channeling Joni Mitchell's lyricism, and then bam, he's in full-blown Hendrix mode, tearing the roof off with a guitar solo that could bring grown men to tears. When he picked up that guitar, it didn't sound like notes, it sounded like fire. Even Eric Clapton was once asked what it felt like to be the greatest guitarist alive. His answer? I don't know. Ask Prince. So why did Page keep his distance? Industry insiders whisper that Page knew exactly where the line was, and Prince was the line. Prince didn't just play better, he performed better. Page's mystique, his occult symbolism, the violin bow solos. It was powerful in the 70s. But by the time Prince showed up in heels, doing splits mid-solo and tossing guitars into the clouds like confetti, Jimmy's theatrical wizardry started to feel archaic. There was even a 90s European festival where both were rumored to be invited. Prince allegedly asked if Page would jam with him on stage. Page declined, politely, firmly. That's not beef, that's strategic retreat. Because Prince didn't just own the stage, he rewrote the rules of what the stage could be. And Page, he knew better than to step into that purple hurricane. 2. Eddie Van Halen. Jimmy Page didn't just dislike Eddie Van Halen, he practically dismissed him. Now let's be clear, Eddie was a revolution. The man didn't just play the guitar, he redefined it. His two-handed tapping technique, his wild harmonic squeals, those blazing runs across the fretboard, it was like someone strapped a rocket to classic rock and hit detonate. He made guitars sound like spaceships. But Page, he wasn't buying the hype. In an interview from the mid-1880s, when Eddie was at the height of his powers, Page was asked what he thought of this young shredder from Pasadena. His response? A dismissive shrug and a line that hit harder than a power chord. He's clever, but it's all tricks. All tricks. That's like telling Mozart, nice notes, but it's just sound. So what was the real issue here? Well, Eddie broke the very mold Page helped create. Jimmy's guitar work with Zeppelin was moody, mysterious, and deeply rooted in blues. It was ritualistic. It was raw. Eddie, on the other hand, brought joy and chaos. He played fast, he played bright, and, perhaps most offensive to Page, he smiled while doing it. He looked like he was having fun. To Jimmy, that wasn't the job. Guitar gods were supposed to be stoic, untouchable. Eddie? He was on MTV, cracking jokes in interviews, playing solos on Michael Jackson tracks, showing up everywhere. He wasn't just a player, he was a brand. To Page, that wasn't artistry, that was entertainment. But here's the kicker, Eddie didn't need approval. He just plugged in, smiled like a kid with a toy, and melted faces anyway. And maybe that's what stung the most. Number 1, Edge from U2. Now, Jimmy Page never came out and explicitly said, the Edge is overrated. He's too seasoned for that kind of direct hit. But if you piece together the clues, interviews, sly quotes, subtle digs, it becomes pretty clear. Page wasn't exactly cranking Where the Streets Have No Name in his downtime. Let's rewind to the early 2000s, when guitar culture was shifting. U2 was everywhere, headlining Glastonbury, dominating award shows, and fronting every iPod commercial. And the Edge? He was the architect of their signature sound, shimmering, layered, soaked in delay. It was revolutionary, no doubt. but to Page it probably felt like cheating. In one interview, Page dropped a line that sent guitar forums into meltdown. Talking about modern players, he said, "Some bands rely on effects more than playing. You can't hide behind pedals forever. At some point, you have to feel the note." On paper, innocent. In context, U2 had just wrapped a massive tour, and the Edge is basically the human embodiment of a pedal board. Here's the thing, the Edge doesn't play like a traditional guitar hero. He doesn't rip solos or melt faces with speed. He builds atmosphere. One note, perfectly timed, pinging through delay and reverb to create emotional architecture. It's studio wizardry as musicianship. But to Jimmy Page, a man who bled calluses onto fretboards, who summoned thunder from wood and wire, that wasn't guitar playing. That was signal processing. Page came up in the church of Clapton, Beck, and blues, where tone came from fingers, not firmware. So when he was once asked about the greatest guitarists alive, Page raised an eyebrow and said, "Depends what you mean by guitarist. These days, anyone with a pedal board gets called a genius." He didn't name names, he didn't have to. And the Edge, cool as ever, no response, no clapback, just kept tapping his notes into the infinite delay, while his fans lit up stadiums. But somewhere, deep under the reverb, you know Page was listening and wincing. So what does this all tell us? At the end of the day, Jimmy Page wasn't just a guitar god, he was a purist. He believed in grit, soul, raw energy. And if you didn't bleed on the fretboard, you probably didn't impress him. Whether it was the processed shimmer of the Edge, the polished pop of John Mayer, or the flash and flare of guys like Yngwie Malmsteen, Page had opinions. Big ones. But that's the beauty of music. It sparks debate. One man's noise is another man's masterpiece. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, smash that like button if you learned something new, and don't forget to subscribe for more music deep dives, untold stories, and legends unfiltered. Hit the bell too so you don't miss the next one, because we're just getting started. Thanks for watching. Now go crank some Zeppelin, loud.